one of the main effects of trauma is that trauma affects the way we cope with life. Coping is something that we have to learn. We just aren't born having a sense of how to cope with life. It is something that is taught to us. So if you picture yourself as a child and you're feeling scared or you're feeling panicky, what a parent in a healthy situation would do is to say with you, sit down with you and say, I know you're feeling this way. Let me tell you what you need to do here. And they would comfort you. They would teach you. They would give you some tools to use to help you handle the situation. And so the next time that situation came up, you wouldn't panic because you would go, I know what to do. So you learned a coping skill. And through childhood, you would gradually assemble a toolkit that had more and more stuff that would enable you to handle stress and all kinds of difficult situations. That's the ideal. That's in a healthy home. But sadly, that isn't what happens in the home where there's complex trauma. Because the complex trauma is being inflicted by, usually, the participants in the home. And so instead of teaching you how to deal with the trauma, they're inflicting trauma on you and not helping you cope with it. Rather, they're saying, get over it, quit being a suck, etc., etc. And so you then begin to go the fight, flight, freeze, and other coping mechanisms. And that's what we're going to look at today. So what then happens in a child where there's complex trauma is their focus is, how do I survive? And then what do I do to get some of my needs met? And what happens is, in survival mode, the child picks what they think will help them survive and get their needs met, and it seems to work. They seem to have come across the perfect solution, and so they begin to do it, and they keep doing it, and it seems to be giving good results until you get into your teens, your late teens, into adult life, and you begin to find out that the coping skills that I thought were helping me are actually making my life worse. And instead of protecting me from getting hurt, they're causing me to get hurt even more. And so that is the big picture of what we're going to look at. Now I want to just flip and give you a little bit around what's going on in the brain when you face complex trauma. So if you can again think of your brain, that there are two parts to it. You have the thinking part on the front, and it learns, it processes, it thinks through stuff logically, it evaluates stuff. That's the front of your brain. And then in the center of the brain, we have what is known as the limbic system, which is the doing part. It's the part that when you get kind of in a place of being afraid, you go fight, flight. That's the limbic part happening. Okay, so here's how this works. If you take what I just told you at the beginning about a child being afraid, what will happen with that child is you have this limbic part that when you see danger, it becomes aroused. It becomes alert. It is kind of alarm system goes off and says, danger, danger. What happens when the parent sits down with the child and says, you know what, you don't need to be afraid, and they help the child think it through, is they engage the front part of your brain and help you process the scary situation. And so as you learn and as you think your way through it, what happens is that limbic system, the doing part, relaxes. And then the next time you face that danger and the limbic system begins to get the alarm system, the front part kicks in and says, no, I got this covered. You can relax. I know what to do. Okay? In the case of extreme danger, the brain, that limbic system says, this is really scary. This is really dangerous. What it then does is shuts down the front part of the brain. says, I'm not listening to you because I don't got time to think this through. This is so dangerous, I got to act now. And so the limbic system takes over and shuts down that front part of the brain, and you go fight, flight, and you go into action. Okay, now take that to growing up in complex trauma. So instead of your parents responding when that limbic system is aroused and the alarm bells go off, nobody helps you cope. And so what does your brain begin to do? Your brain begins to see all dangerous situations as extremely dangerous situations. And so instead of even thinking about the situation and possible solutions, that part gets ignored and shut down, and the limbic part takes over and it goes into fight or flight. And so what is the sad reality for kids that grow up in complex trauma is they have this overactive limbic system that doesn't have a front part of the brain that can help them process the danger around them. And so as soon as they smell danger, fight, flight kicks in a nanosecond, and no thinking happens at all. And that's kind of what's going on in the brain. Now let me take that further to now you're in a recovery situation. You're aware that you have trauma. What do you do with that now? So let me back up to this diagram. The bottom line is that original brain circuit. So as you face danger, which is the trigger that says alarm bells go off, we are in danger, you fight, flight, and you build a brain circuit. So as soon as you smell that kind of danger, this circuit fires immediately and it goes to fight and flight, okay? You come into recovery now and say, I have to change that. I can't be numbing and avoiding every time I'm feeling anxiety or fear. And so you try then to build a new circuit on top of that old one. So when you feel a trigger, the old you says fight, flight, but you say, hang on, and you got about a nanosecond to respond. But you successfully respond and say, I'm not going to run away, and I'm not going to get angry and fight. I am going, and you start to do new responses. You get the front of your brain engaged, and you begin to learn other ways of handling it. So you assemble a toolbox. So that's what you're doing as you begin to try and deal with complex trauma, is you begin building new brain circuits. But those are tough to build. Now here's what happens for many, many people. You'll be building these new circuits, so you'll get trauma, or you'll get reminders of trauma, you'll get new experiences that feel like danger, and you'll get pretty good at saying, you know what, I can handle this now. I can handle this. And you go, and the new responses, and life is going good. Here's a little thing we're learning about the brain. Let's say you get a whole bunch of bad day situations in one day. So you get fired from your job, you come home and your dog's dead, your wife is mad at you and threatening to divorce you, and all of a sudden you're going, danger, 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 and guess what your brain does? It says, I can't depend on these new circuits because this is extreme danger. I'm going back to the most reliable circuit. And that's where a person all of a sudden does something stupid and they go, what was that all about? And that is because as stress goes up and it gets to a certain point, the brain says, time to go back to old Mr. Reliable. So just be aware of that. Now, if you're an addict, let me just translate that for you. If you look at that bottom line, that old circuit, just change the trauma piece. And let's say you put in AA's HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So let's say you're lonely, that's your trigger. In the past, you would say, I'm lonely, so I am going to, and it usually would end up at drugs or alcohol, okay? So now you come into recovery. Well, I should say you've reinforced that circuit 1,000 times. You come into recovery and you say, I'm lonely. I am going to phone somebody. I'm going to go to a meeting, and you build a new circuit on top of that. And you do really well. And you're quite proud of yourself, and you should be. Then you lose your job. You come home, your dog's dead, and your wife's mad at you and threatening divorce. And you go, stress is away. What does the brain do? It goes back to that old circuit that says, I think I need a drink. I think I need to pick up. And you relapse. And so what we again know is that for stress, for people coming from complex trauma, especially with those in addiction, when stress gets to a certain point, it takes them back to the old circuit, which is not just fight or flight, but for the addict, it's back to a relapse.